The strange customer. The neon lights flickered above John's small repair shop, casting a dull blue glow over his messy workstation. The space station was quiet at this hour. Most people were inside the entertainment halls, drinking, gambling, or watching holofights. But John had no time for that. He was a mechanic, and his life was simple: fix broken things, get paid, and try to survive another day. Tonight, he was about to close when the door slid open with a soft hiss. A figure stepped inside, tall and cloaked, moving with careful, deliberate steps. The long, tattered hood covered most of their body, but John immediately noticed the armor underneath: dark, battle-scarred, and clearly not human-made. John wiped his greasy hands on a rag and sighed. He had seen all kinds of customers: smugglers, mercenaries, even bounty hunters. But something about this one felt different. The figure stopped near his workbench and finally spoke. The voice was low, calm, and slightly distorted. "I need repairs." John raised an eyebrow. "You're gonna have to be more specific." The figure hesitated before lifting their arm. A deep crack ran along the forearm plating, sparks flickering from broken circuits. Beneath the damaged armor, John caught a glimpse of something strange: pale blue skin marked with faint golden patterns. Not human. John exhaled. "That's some advanced tech. Not local." "What did you do? Wrestle a plasma beast?" The stranger didn't laugh. "Can you fix it or not?" John studied the damage. The alloy was Silari make, a species known for their brutal warriors and even sharper politics. He had never met one in person, but he had heard stories. If this stranger was a Silari, they weren't just some random traveler. "Depends," John said slowly. "I'll need specialized parts, and parts aren't free." The figure reached into their cloak and placed a small metal cube on the table. It glowed faintly with stored energy. John's heart nearly stopped. A pure energy core. This thing was worth a fortune on the black market, more money than he'd ever made in a year. "Is this enough?" the figure asked. John swallowed hard and grabbed the core. It was real. He knew he should say no. Taking this job could mean trouble. But his rent was due, and he hadn't eaten a proper meal in 3 days. "Yeah," he muttered. "I'll get started." John pulled over his tools and carefully inspected the armor. The damage was bad, but he had fixed worse. As he worked, he couldn't help but glance at the stranger. "Got a name?" he asked. Silence. "Okay, mystery customer it is." Still no response. John sighed and focused on the repair. The metal was fused in places where it shouldn't be. Some kind of energy blast must have caused this. Whatever this stranger had been fighting, they barely made it out. Minutes passed. Then, out of the corner of his eye, John noticed something strange. The armor had a bioseal, a system meant to protect the wearer from exposure. But there was blood leaking through. The stranger was hurt. Badly. "You're injured," John said, not bothering to hide the concern in his voice. "It's nothing." "Doesn't look like nothing." The figure stiffened. "Just fix the armor." John gritted his teeth. He wasn't a doctor, but he knew an untreated wound when he saw one. He grabbed a med pack from his drawer and held it out. "Look, you're paying me a fortune. I don't need you passing out in my shop." The stranger didn't move for a long moment. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, they reached for the med pack and took it. John smirked. "See, that wasn't so hard." Still, the stranger said nothing. John kept working. The repair was nearly done when a loud chime echoed through the shop. He turned toward the sound. His station's security alert system was flashing red. He tapped the screen, and a wanted notice appeared. The station's guards were searching for a fugitive. His eyes scanned the image, and his stomach dropped. The description matched his customer perfectly. John felt his heartbeat speed up. He slowly turned his head, trying to keep his face neutral. If this stranger knew he had seen the alert, things could turn bad fast. The figure stood still, watching him. Had they seen the notice too? John forced a casual laugh. Huh. Station's got some trouble tonight. No reaction. He glanced back at the alert. It didn't say much, just that the fugitive was dangerous and armed. No reason, no crime listed, just a bounty and a warning. What had this person done? John swallowed. He had a choice. He could pretend he didn't see the alert, finish the job, and take the money. Or he could report them and stay out of trouble. His fingers twitched over the alert screen. Then he looked at the armor again, the damage, the blood, the desperation. This wasn't the armor of a criminal running from justice. It was the armor of a warrior who had barely escaped something deadly. John sighed and shut off the security alert. I just need 5 more minutes, he said. Then you're good to go. The stranger hesitated. Then, for the first time, their voice softened. Thank you. John didn't reply. He just focused on his work. Something told him he had just made a very dangerous choice. The truth beneath the armor. The repair was finished. The armor's plating gleamed under the flickering workshop lights, its deep cracks now seamlessly sealed, its damaged circuits humming back to life. John wiped the sweat from his brow, stepping back to admire his work. That should hold, he muttered. The cloaked figure flexed their arm, testing the repaired plating. A soft hum of energy pulsed through the suit as its internal systems rebooted. It was impressive technology, more advanced than anything John had ever worked on before. The stranger reached into their cloak and tossed something onto the workbench. Payment. John picked it up. It was another energy core, smaller than the first, but still worth a fortune. More than fair for the job. Guess I should be flattered, he said, pocketing it. You pay better than most of my customers. The figure stood silent, as if considering something. Then, in a voice quieter than before, they spoke. You saw the alert, didn't you? John's muscles tensed. He kept his face neutral, pretending to check his tools. What alert? A pause. Then the figure pulled back their hood. John froze. The woman standing before him wasn't human. Her skin was pale blue, marked with thin golden lines that ran across her cheekbones and down her neck in intricate, swirling patterns. Her eyes were large, their irises glowing faintly like molten gold. Her hair was dark, pulled back into a simple braid, and she had 2 short, curved horns barely peeking through. She was Xilari, and not just any Xilari. John had seen images before, on news reports, on propaganda posters, on bounty notices. The woman before him was Queen Syraxa of the Xilari Empire, a royal fugitive, a wanted queen. And she was standing in his shop. John stepped back, his heart pounding. You've got to be kidding me. Syraxa's golden eyes didn't believe his. I need your help, human. John let out a dry laugh. Help? I just helped you. You got your armor. You got your repairs. I didn't turn you in. That's more than enough. No, she shook her head. Not yet. John glanced at the security feed, half expecting soldiers to storm in any second. Look, I don't know what you did, and I don't want to know. But if the station patrols find you here, I'm screwed. You're Xilari royalty. If they catch me helping you, I won't just get arrested. I'll disappear. Syraxa's expression didn't change. Then you understand why I must stay hidden. John ran a hand down his face. This is bad. Really bad. He turned to grab his wrench, just to keep his hands busy, but suddenly the lights flickered. A soft hum filled the air, and the shop's power dimmed for a second before coming back. John frowned. What was that? Syraxa exhaled. They found me. John's blood ran cold. Who? Syraxa's gaze sharpened. The ones hunting me. John rushed to the security console, pulling up the station's external cameras. His stomach dropped. 2 figures in dark armor were stepping onto the docking platform outside. Their helmets were sleek, featureless, with glowing red visors. They carried plasma rifles slung across their backs. Bounty hunters. John turned to Syraxa. You brought bounty hunters to my shop. I didn't bring them, she snapped. They tracked me. Well, congratulations. Now they're my problem too. Syraxa turned toward the exit. I can deal with them. John grabbed her arm. Oh no, you don't. You start a firefight out there. The whole station's gonna come down on us. We need to leave. Quietly. Syraxa hesitated. John saw it in her face. She wanted to fight. But she also knew he was right. They won't stop, she said, even if we run. John took a deep breath. Then we better make sure they don't follow. The escape plan. John moved quickly, grabbing a small device from his workbench, a signal scrambler. It wouldn't do much, but it might buy them time by jamming the bounty hunter scanners. Follow me, he muttered, leading Syraxa through the back exit. The hallway beyond was dimly lit, filled with old maintenance panels and discarded parts. Where are we going? She asked. Docking bay, John whispered. I've got a ship. It's not fast, but it'll get us off this station. Syraxa gave him a skeptical look. Why are you helping me? John didn't have an answer. Maybe it was the look in her eyes. Maybe it was the fact that she had been betrayed by her own people. Maybe it was just the stupid, reckless side of him that never knew when to walk away from trouble. Let's just say I have a bad habit of making terrible choices, he muttered. They reached the maintenance tunnel leading to the docks, but as soon as they stepped forward, a shadow moved ahead. One of the bounty hunters was already there, standing between them and the ship. John cursed. How did they get here so fast? The bounty hunter raised his rifle. Syraxa didn't hesitate. In a single fluid motion, she lunged forward, grabbing John and yanking him down just as the rifle fired. A bright plasma bolt sizzled through the air, missing John's head by inches. Syraxa moved fast, inhumanly fast. She spun, grabbing a loose pipe from the floor and swinging it like a weapon. The metal crashed against the bounty hunter's helmet, sending sparks flying. He stumbled, but before he could react, Syraxa grabbed his own rifle and slammed it into his chest, knocking him to the ground. John barely had time to breathe before Syraxa grabbed his wrist. Move, she ordered. They ran. Behind them, the other bounty hunter's voice crackled through a hidden comlink. Target confirmed. Send reinforcements. John's heart pounded. This wasn't over. As they reached the docking bay, John threw open the ship's hatch. Get in. Syraxa climbed aboard just as alarms started blaring through the station. John rushed to the pilot's seat, flipping switches, powering up the ship's engines. The control panel blinked to life. The docking doors ahead began to close. Station security was locking them in. No, no, no. John cursed, slamming the throttle. With a deafening roar, the ship's engines blasted forward, just as the doors were about to seal shut. The ship lurched into open space, spinning wildly before stabilizing. John gasped, gripping the controls. He turned to Syraxa. You better start explaining, Your Highness. Syraxa's golden eyes burned. They tried to kill me, she said, and if we don't move fast, they'll try again. John exhaled. He was officially in over his head. The hunters close in. The ship's engines roared, shaking the entire cockpit as John yanked the controls. Outside, the vast blackness of space stretched in every direction, dotted with distant stars. The space station they had just escaped from was shrinking behind them, but John wasn't celebrating yet. He glanced at the radar. Red blips. Moving fast. His stomach twisted. The bounty hunters weren't giving up. They're in pursuit, he muttered, gripping the throttle. And they've got faster ships. Syraxa leaned against the co-pilot's seat, her face still sharp with focus. I told you they wouldn't stop. John threw her a look. Yeah. Well, now would be a great time to tell me why they want you dead. Syraxa's golden eyes flickered in the dim cockpit lights. She exhaled. Because I am the last obstacle in their way. John clenched his jaw. Not vague at all. Obstacle to what? Control, she said. Over my people. Over my empire. John's fingers tightened around the controls. He wasn't sure why he even cared about Silari politics, but something about the way she said it made his gut twist. Her own people betrayed her. Before he could press her further, a warning siren blared through the cockpit. "Damn it," he hissed. "They locked onto us." Saraxa looked at the radar. 3 bounty hunter ships, closing in from all angles. They weren't just following. They were herding them. John's heart pounded. They weren't trying to shoot them down. "They want us alive," he muttered. "No," Saraxa corrected. "They want me alive." That sent a chill down his spine. The attack begins. The first enemy ship fired. John barely reacted in time, twisting the controls. The ship jerked violently, a plasma bolt grazing the hull. Warning lights flashed, but no critical damage. "Great," John grumbled. "We're officially in a dogfight. And I don't have weapons." Saraxa turned to him sharply. "You don't have weapons. I'm a mechanic, not a smuggler." The ship shook again as another blast barely missed them. Saraxa's eyes flicked around the cockpit, scanning the controls. Then she stood up. "Buy me 2 minutes," she said. John blinked. "What?" She didn't answer. She was already moving. John had no idea what she was planning. But right now, he had bigger problems. He shoved the throttle forward, diving toward the asteroid field below. The asteroid gauntlet. John's ship hurtled downward, weaving through massive floating rocks that tumbled through space. The bounty hunters followed. A warning light flashed. Collision risk. High. John gritted his teeth. He didn't have a choice. "I really hope you know what you're doing," he shouted toward Saraxa, who was somewhere in the back of the ship. She didn't respond. John jerked the controls left, narrowly avoiding an asteroid the size of a city block. The bounty hunters weren't so lucky. One of them clipped the rock, spinning wildly out of control before slamming into another asteroid. John whooped. 1 down. But the other 2 were still on him. Suddenly, a deep rumbling echoed from the back of the ship. The whole vessel vibrated. "What the hell are you doing back there?" John yelled. Saraxa's voice came through the comms. "I just rerouted the reactor's output." John's eyes widened. "You what?" "Brace yourself." Before he could ask why, a massive energy surge exploded from the back of the ship. The engines blazed, pushing the ship forward with twice its normal speed. The sudden burst sent them rocketing through the asteroid field, while the bounty hunters struggled to keep up. John's body slammed against his seat from the force. "Are you trying to kill us?" Saraxa reappeared in the cockpit, breathing hard. "They won't be able to match our speed. Not through this field." John checked the radar. She was right. The remaining 2 bounty hunters were lagging behind, struggling to navigate the asteroids while keeping up. For the first time, they had the advantage. Out of the frying pan, John finally let out a breath. "Okay, we lost them." Saraxa didn't look relieved. Not for long. He turned to her. "Yeah, I figured. Since you still haven't told me exactly who betrayed you, and why they're willing to send an army after you." Saraxa exhaled, gripping the edge of the console. For the first time, she looked tired. "My people believe I am dead," she admitted. "That's what they were told. My enemies staged an assassination." John's stomach twisted. "So, what? You faked your death?" "No," she said darkly. "They tried to kill me, and I barely survived." A silence stretched between them. John felt the weight of her words. "So if you're alive," he said slowly, "that means the people running your empire right now are frauds," Saraxa finished, "and they don't want anyone to know the truth." John ran a hand down his face. "Great, just great. So what's your plan?" he asked. Saraxa straightened. Her golden eyes burned with determination. "I need to get to a secure location," she said. "One where I can contact the last few people still loyal to me. If I can gather them, I can fight back. Take back what's mine." John stared at her. She spoke like it was that simple, Like she could just gather her allies, march into her empire, and take back her throne. John had seen a lot of stupid plans in his life. This was insane. Okay, he said slowly. One small problem. Those bounty hunters, they aren't gonna stop. And even if we escape, you think your enemies won't send more? Siraxa met his gaze. I know they will. John sighed. So what you're saying is, I just made myself an enemy of an entire empire. Siraxa tilted her head. You could leave. John snorted. Oh sure. I could drop you off at the nearest station and pretend none of this happened. But let's be honest, those guys already saw me with you. Even if I ran, they'd track me down. Siraxa didn't deny it. John exhaled. Then, against every ounce of common sense, he leaned back in his seat. Guess I'm in then. Siraxa studied him for a moment. Then, for the first time since they met, she smiled. It was small, subtle, but John saw it, and he had a feeling he'd just signed up for the biggest mistake of his life. The Great Escape. The cockpit was silent except for the low hum of the ship's engines. Outside, the asteroid field stretched into the distance, massive chunks of rock floating aimlessly in space. The radar was clear, for now. John let out a breath. His hand still gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles white. He had just outrun 2 bounty hunters, lost another in the asteroid field, and somehow managed not to die. All right, he muttered, still catching his breath. We need a plan, because as soon as those guys get back up, we're screwed. Siraxa, seated next to him, stared at the navigation screen. Her golden eyes were sharp, calculating. We can't stay here, she said. They'll send more ships, and I doubt we'll be lucky a second time. John groaned. You think I don't know that? He pulled up the star map, scrolling through possible destinations. Most nearby planets were either uninhabited wastelands or under heavy surveillance by the same people hunting them. We need somewhere off the grid, Siraxa said. A place where they won't expect us to go. John rubbed his temples. Yeah, and where exactly is that? Siraxa leaned forward, her fingers hovering over the holographic map. Then, without hesitation, she pointed at a sector labeled K-17. John's eyes widened. Oh, hell no. Siraxa raised an eyebrow. You know it? Yeah, John muttered. It's a backwater moon. Barely any settlements, just a bunch of scavengers and criminals. If we land there, we might not get off again. Siraxa didn't hesitate. Then that's where we go. John exhaled, staring at the coordinates. The bounty hunters would never expect them to land on K-17, which also meant they'd have nowhere to run if things went south. This is a terrible idea, he muttered, adjusting the ship's course. Siraxa smirked. But you're doing it anyway. John scowled. Yeah, just don't get us killed. He punched the throttle. With a roar, the ship shot forward, leaving the asteroid field behind. The descent into K-17. 30 minutes later, the ship broke through K-17's atmosphere. The planet was exactly as John remembered, a wasteland of rust-colored sand, jagged cliffs, and abandoned ruins. This place had once been a mining colony, but when the ores dried up, the corporations left, and only the desperate stayed behind. John guided the ship lower, searching for a good place to land. The air was thick with dust storms, making visibility difficult. This place looks like hell, he muttered. Siraxa was studying the scanners. Perfect. John gave her a look. You got a weird definition of perfect, lady. There, Siraxa pointed. A deep canyon stretched beneath them, its walls high and steep. Inside, hidden between the cliffs, was an old bunker half buried in the sand. John frowned. You know that place. No, Siraxa admitted, but it looks defensible. John grunted. Yeah, or it's crawling with bandits. Then we'll deal with that when we land. John sighed. Why was every plan she had just pure insanity? Still, he adjusted the ship's course, bringing them lower. As they neared the bunker, a red light flashed on the control panel. John's stomach dropped. Proximity alert. He looked at the radar. Something was already there. The ambush. The moment the ship touched down, John powered off the engines and grabbed his blaster from under the seat. Saraxa was already standing, her golden eyes sharp. She reached for the knife strapped to her belt, a curved, alien-looking blade that looked wickedly sharp. John peered out the viewport. The bunker entrance was partially open, its doors rusted and half-broken. Shadows moved inside. "Company," he muttered. Saraxa nodded. "Let's go." John hesitated. "You sure about this? We could just stay on the ship." Saraxa gave him a deadpan look. "And wait for the bounty hunters to track us." "No." John sighed. Figures. They stepped onto the rocky surface, dust swirling around their feet. The air was dry, the wind carrying the scent of rust and decay. As they approached the bunker entrance, John kept his blaster raised. Then, movement. A figure lunged out of the darkness, swinging the metal pipe. John barely dodged in time. The attacker, a scrawny man in ragged clothes, swung again, but before he could land a hit, Saraxa moved. In a single fluid motion, she caught his wrist, twisted it violently, and slammed him to the ground. The man groaned, coughing as dust kicked up around him. John pointed his blaster at his face. "All right, pal. Talk." The man spat blood onto the ground, glaring up at them. "You shouldn't be here." Saraxa crouched beside him, her golden eyes glowing faintly. "Who are you?" The man hesitated. Then he laughed bitterly. "You're too late." John frowned. Too late for what? Before the man could answer, a distant roar shook the canyon. John turned. His heart dropped. 3 ships were descending toward them. Sleek, black, bounty hunter ships. John swore. How did they find us so fast? The captured man coughed. "Because we called them." John froze. Saraxa's expression darkened. "You set a trap." The man grinned. "Doesn't matter now. You're dead either way." John didn't hesitate. He swung his blaster, knocking the man unconscious. Saraxa was already moving. "We need to get back to the ship. Now." John turned, but it was too late. The bounty hunter ships landed just beyond their own. Figures in dark armored suits disembarked, their red visors glowing in the dusty light. John gritted his teeth. They were trapped. The last stand. The lead bounty hunter stepped forward. He was taller than the others, his armor sleeker, more advanced. His voice crackled through his helmet speaker. "Saraxa of the Xilari Empire," he said coldly. "You have nowhere left to run." Saraxa didn't flinch. "I don't run." John sighed. "Oh, great. Now she wants to be dramatic." The bounty hunter raised his hand. His soldiers took a step forward. John tightened his grip on his blaster. Saraxa reached for her knife. The wind howled. Then, all at once, the bounty hunters attacked. Secrets and betrayal. The dusty wind howled through the canyon, kicking up clouds of sand and debris as the bounty hunters closed in. Their armored suits gleamed under the weak sunlight, red visors glowing like hungry predators. John gritted his teeth. His blaster was warm in his hands, but against a squad of elite hunters, he might as well have been holding a wrench. Beside him, Saraxa stood tall, her golden eyes fierce, her curved knife glinting in the fading light. The lead bounty hunter took another step forward. His voice crackled through his helmet. "Drop your weapons." John let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, let me think about that." "No." The hunter tilted his head slightly. "We don't need you, human. We only want her." Saraxa's jaw tightened, but she didn't move. John glanced at her, then back at the bounty hunters. That was all he needed to hear. He whispered out of the side of his mouth, "Run on my signal." Saraxa didn't even blink. "No." John groaned. "Oh, just trust me, okay?" The bounty hunters raised their rifles. John fired first. The shot hit the closest hunter right in the chest, knocking him back a step. His armor absorbed most of the blast, but it was enough of a distraction. "Now," John shouted. Syraxa moved like lightning. She lunged forward, ducking low, twisting under a rifle barrel, then slammed her knife into a bounty hunter's throat. Sparks flew. The suit was reinforced, but the blade had pierced a weak spot in the armor. The bounty hunter collapsed, choking. John, meanwhile, did what he did best: improvised. He fired wildly, forcing the hunters to take cover. Then he grabbed a discarded fuel canister from the ground. Syraxa caught on instantly. She snatched John's blaster, fired at the canister. Boom! The explosion lit up the canyon, sending a shockwave through the sand. A few bounty hunters were thrown off their feet, their visors cracked and flickering. John grabbed Syraxa's arm. "Come on." They sprinted toward the bunker, slipping inside just as another volley of plasma fire shattered the ground behind them. The metal doors slammed shut. Darkness swallowed them whole. The hidden bunker. John's breath was ragged. His ears rang from the explosion. Syraxa pressed herself against the cold metal wall, listening for movement outside. The bounty hunters weren't blasting their way in. Not yet. "They won't wait forever," John whispered. "We need to find another way out." Syraxa nodded. "Let's move." They stepped deeper into the bunker. The air was stale, filled with the scent of rust, oil, and something long forgotten. Dim emergency lights flickered along the ceiling, casting eerie shadows over the walls. John ran his fingers along a control panel, but it was long dead. Place looks abandoned. Syraxa's gaze swept across the hall. Not completely. She pointed. Further in, a pile of discarded supplies sat in the corner, recently disturbed. John stiffened. "We're not alone." A rustling sound came from the darkness ahead. John's hand tightened on his blaster. Syraxa raised her knife. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. The unexpected ally. The man looked half dead, thin, with a scruffy beard and sunken eyes. His clothes were tattered, his face covered in grime. But his gun was steady. John raised his hands. "Hey, now, let's all be friends here." The man's voice was rough. "Depends. You one of them?" Syraxa took a step forward. "We're not bounty hunters." The man's gun stayed raised. "Then why are they after you?" John sighed. "Long story." The man studied them for a moment, then, slowly, lowered his weapon. "Name's Drax," he muttered. "And if you're running from those bastards, you're in the right place." Syraxa tilted her head. "You know them." Drax smirked. "Know them? Lady, I used to work for them." John blinked. "Wait, what?" Drax stepped aside, motioning for them to follow. "Come on. If you want to survive, you're gonna need more than luck." John and Syraxa exchanged a glance. Then they followed him into the depths of the bunker. The truth unfolds. Drax led them through a series of metal corridors until they reached a small control room. To John's surprise, the power was still on. Holographic screens flickered to life, displaying data feeds, ship logs, and bounty contracts. John whistled. "You've got yourself quite a setup here." Drax shrugged. "You learn a few tricks when you work for the wrong people." Syraxa crossed her arms. "What do you know about them?" Drax exhaled. "Plenty." He tapped on one of the consoles. A bounty contract flashed onto the screen. Target: Syraxa of the Celery Empire. Condition: alive. Reward: 10 million Suridites. John's stomach sank. Syraxa didn't react. She just stared at the screen. Drax leaned back. "They really want you." John rubbed his face. "Okay, let's cut to the chase. Why are they after her?" Drax smirked. "Same reason they were after me. She's a threat." John glanced at Syraxa. "Yeah, I got that part. Mine being more specific." Drax folded his arms. "Let me guess. You think you're on the run from bounty hunters, right? Syrax's gaze sharpened. Aren't we? Drax shook his head. They're not just bounty hunters. They're Black Sun. John froze. Black Sun. He had heard the name before. Everyone had. They weren't just mercenaries. They were the shadow army of the Cellari Empire, a secret organization that handled the dirtiest jobs. Assassinations, coups, regime changes. Syraxa stiffened. That's impossible. Black Sun was. Disbanded. Drax laughed bitterly. Yeah, sure. That's what they told the public. But the truth, they just went underground. And now, they run your empire. John's stomach turned to ice. Syrax's hands clenched into fists. You're saying they're the ones who... Drax nodded. Yeah, they staged your assassination. They took over. And now, they need to make sure you stay dead. Silence filled the room. John finally exhaled. Well, he muttered, guess we just pissed off the worst people in the galaxy. Syrax's golden eyes burned, not with fear, but with fury. They wanted me dead, she said, her voice quiet but dangerous. Now, they should be afraid. Drax chuckled. I like you. John groaned. I don't. Outside, the sound of boots on metal echoed through the canyon. The bounty hunters had found them. John cocked his blaster. Well, folks, he muttered, looks like we got a war to start. The final stand. The sound of boots on metal echoed through the dusty bunker corridors. The bounty hunters were here. John tightened his grip on his blaster, his heart pounding. Syraxa stood beside him, her golden eyes fierce and focused. Drax, half smirking, as if he had been waiting for this, checked the energy charge on his rifle. They had seconds before the bounty hunters breached the entrance. John let out a breath. So, anyone got a genius plan? Drax smirked. Yeah, try not to die. John rolled his eyes. Fantastic. Syraxa, however, wasn't listening. Her gaze was locked on the flickering holomap of the bunker, scanning for something. There, she muttered, pointing. John leaned in. She was indicating a narrow ventilation shaft that ran along the back of the bunker, a possible escape route. John's stomach twisted. I don't like that look on your face. Syraxa turned to him. You and Drax will take the tunnel. Get to the surface. John's eyebrows shot up. Wait. What? I'll stay here. John gawked at her. You want to fight all of them by yourself. Syraxa's expression was unreadable. I can hold them off. Drax scoffed. That's cute, but they've got numbers. We need a real plan. Syraxa looked him in the eyes. I need you to trust me. John clenched his jaw. He hated this. Every instinct screamed that staying together was the better option. But there was something in Syraxa's expression. Something unshakable. John exhaled. Fine. But if you die, I'm bringing you back just to yell at you. Syraxa smirked. Deal. Drax grunted. All right. Let's move before those bastards blow a hole in the door. John hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then, with a final glance at Syraxa, he turned and followed Drax toward the ventilation shaft. And behind them, Syraxa stood alone, gripping her blade. Waiting. The battle begins. The bunker doors exploded inward in a shower of molten metal. Syraxa didn't move. Smoke filled the entrance. Through the haze, dark figures stepped forward, their black armor gleaming under the bunker's flickering lights. Their leader, the one with the sleekest armor and a voice like cracking ice, raised his rifle. You're outnumbered, Cellari. Syraxa slowly lifted her head, golden eyes burning. She smiled. I don't need numbers. The bounty hunter didn't even get to react. Syraxa moved, faster than human eyes could follow. Her blade sliced through the air, catching the first hunter across the throat. Blood and sparks sprayed as he crumpled. Before the others could react, she grabbed his fallen rifle, pivoted, and fired. A plasma bolt hit the next bounty hunter in the chest, sending him crashing into a rusted pipe. Chaos erupted. The remaining hunters rushed forward, but Syraxa was already among them, weaving between their attacks like a phantom. A rifle swung at her head. She ducked. A blade sliced toward her ribs. She sidestepped. Then she twisted low, hooked a leg around an enemy's knee, and yanked, sending the armored figure sprawling into the dirt. One by one, they fell. But more were coming. Syraxa exhaled sharply. She wasn't getting out of this without a few hits. But she didn't need to win. She just needed to buy time. Meanwhile, the escape route. John and Drax crawled through the narrow ventilation shaft, dust and rust falling into their faces. John grumbled, "I hate everything about this plan." Drax snorted, "What, you wanted to fight an entire kill squad instead?" John grimaced, "No, I wanted to be anywhere but here." They reached a small maintenance hatch. Drax checked a scanner on his wrist, nodded, then kicked the hatch open. They dropped down into a large cavern, lit by dim blue light from bioluminescent moss. John landed hard, groaning. "Okay, now what?" Drax pointed ahead. "We get to the surface. If your queen isn't dead yet, she'll meet us there." John scowled. "Don't call her that." Drax smirked. "Why not?" Starting to care. John opened his mouth, closed it, then muttered, "Shut up." They ran. Back to Syraxa. The last stand. Syraxa was bleeding. Her side burned from a fresh wound where a plasma shot had grazed her ribs. Her breath was uneven. But she was still standing. Only 2 bounty hunters remained. One was badly injured, leaning against the wall, his rifle trembling in his hands. The other was the leader. He stood firm, his armor untouched, his red visor glowing. "You're impressive," he admitted, "but you can't keep this up forever." Syraxa smirked, wiping blood from her lip. "Wanna bet?" The leader tilted his head. "No, I don't." Then, before Syraxa could react, he raised his arm. And something clicked. Syraxa's entire body locked up. Pain shot through her nerves, sharp and agonizing. She collapsed to her knees, gasping. The leader stepped closer, holding up a small black device in his palm. "A neural disruptor," he said smoothly, "calibrated to auxiliary physiology. We had this prepared in case you survived." Syraxa's muscles refused to obey her. Her limbs trembled, useless. The leader knelt beside her. "You fought well, but your fight is over." He lifted his blade. Then, boom, the entire bunker shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. The ground cracked. The leader stumbled, his visor flashing red warnings. "What the—" Boom. Syraxa, still fighting against the disruptor, managed to lift her head. And then she smiled. "You forgot something," she rasped. The leader turned, too late. The ceiling exploded, and through the fire and dust, John's ship came crashing down. The ramp opened midair, and John, grinning like a madman, leaned out, gripping a plasma cannon. "Hey, tin head," he yelled. The leader barely had time to look up before John fired. The plasma shot hit the ground beneath him, sending him flying into the bunker wall. The disruptor fizzled out. Syraxa's body lurched back to life. And the last thing the leader saw was her blade flashing toward his throat. The aftermath. Minutes later, the dust settled. John landed the ship. Syraxa, bruised, bleeding, but alive, stumbled aboard. Drax whistled. "You look like hell." Syraxa collapsed into a seat. "I feel worse." John smirked. "Worth it?" Syraxa met his gaze. And she grinned. "Absolutely." John sighed. "You're insane." Drax chuckled. "She's growing on you, huh?" John groaned. "I hate both of you." The ship took off. Their war was just beginning. Victory and a new beginning. The ship rocketed away from K-17's surface, leaving behind the wreckage of the bunker and the bounty hunters who had failed their mission. The aftershocks of the battle still trembled in John's bones. John sat in the cockpit, gripping the controls with a white-knuckled grip. His ship was in bad shape. Warning lights flickered, the shields were barely holding, and the engines were running on fumes. Behind him, Syraxa leaned against the co-pilot's chair, breathing heavily, her golden eyes still burning with adrenaline. Drax sat against the wall, wiping blood from his lip, and grinning like he'd just won a lottery. John exhaled. All right, I'm officially adding attacking bounty hunters head-on to my list of stupid ideas. Drax chuckled. That list must be getting real long. John shot him a glare. Shut up. Syraxa ignored them both. She was focused on the radar. John followed her gaze, and his stomach dropped. A fleet of ships was waiting for them. Not bounty hunters, not mercenaries, but Silari warships. Syraxa straightened, her fingers curling into fists. They found me. John swore under his breath. What do we do? Syraxa's golden eyes hardened. We don't run. John blinked. I was hoping for something with a little more detail. Syraxa turned to him. I need you to trust me. John hesitated. He had heard those words before, and somehow they always led to trouble. The reckoning. The Xilari fleet didn't attack immediately. Instead, the main battleship hailed them. A transmission flashed onto the cockpit screen, and a hologram flickered to life. A tall, imposing Silari general appeared. His deep blue skin was marked with silver tattoos of high rank, and his piercing white eyes glowed with quiet authority. Syraxa's jaw clenched. John saw it. The recognition. The anger. This was the traitor. The man who had tried to kill her. The real enemy. General Vorax, the supreme commander of the Silari military. His voice was calm, cold, and venomous. So, the dead queen lives. Syraxa's voice was like steel. You always did underestimate me. Vorax smirked. And you always did rely too much on hope. John narrowed his eyes. This guy was dangerous. Drax leaned toward John. I don't like him. John muttered. Yeah, well, I don't like being shot at. But here we are. Vorax continued, ignoring them. You should have stayed dead, Syraxa. Your return complicates things. Syraxa's golden eyes burned. For you. The general smiled. A predator's smile. Yes, and I do hate complications. Then the transmission cut off, and the Xilari fleet opened fire. The final battle. The ship shook violently as plasma cannons fired. John yanked the controls, twisting the ship into a desperate dive. Drax swore, We are so outgunned. Syraxa braced herself. We don't need to win. We just need to get to the flagship. John shot her a wild look. Oh, is that all? Syraxa's eyes locked onto the largest warship in the fleet, the one where Vorax would be. That's where we end this. John muttered, I really, really regret meeting you. Then he pushed the ship forward, dodging plasma fire as they charged straight at the enemy flagship. The boarding operation. John didn't know how they made it. Maybe Vorax was too arrogant to think they would actually ram their way into his ship. Maybe luck was just that insane today. But somehow they breached the hangar doors of the flagship, crashing through a row of fighters before sliding to a halt. John coughed. We are going to die. Drax unbuckled his seatbelt. Not before we kill some bastards first. Syraxa was already up. Move. The ramp slammed open, and the three of them charged into the warship. Silari soldiers reacted instantly, raising their weapons. Syraxa didn't hesitate. She lunged, her blade flashing through the air, cutting through their defenses like a storm of death. John and Drax covered her, firing down corridors, blasting enemies before they could get a proper shot. The ship was massive, but Syraxa knew exactly where she was going. Straight to the command center. Straight to Vorax. The final confrontation. The command doors slid open. Vorax was waiting. He stood alone, hands behind his back, his expression calm.